The next witness is St. Malachy, and before I call him, there's just a small procedural point to note. As you're aware, St. Malachy is a very significant medieval saint,
yes.
And as you're aware, there's a significant trade in images and relics of saints.
Yes.
And given that we're in the company of peasant classes who are greedy and avaricious, St. Malachy has requested that he be allowed to give his evidence from behind the screen, and we're facilitating that. And I would just remind the people here that St. Malachy's image is subject to copyright.
A somewhat unorthodox approach,
yes.
Mr. McDowell, but in deference to his sainthood, we'll accede to your request.
I'm grateful, Judge. I call St. Malachy.
I should say I have no objection to Mr. McDowell's application to have the witness give evidence from behind the screen, but it's without prejudice to Mr. McDowell's submission in respect of the so-called peasant classes who you represent.
Yes, clearly.
So could you state your name, please, for the inquiry? Can you hear me, St. Malachy?
Could you repeat that, please?
Yes, could you state your name, please, for the inquiry?
Mail Madoc O'Murrough rendered Malachy in Latin. Or I'm quite happy to be addressed as Saint Malachy. I was, after all, the first Irish person to be formally canonized as a saint.
Well, we extend our congratulations to you on that achievement. I think that we'll just stick with Malachy for the time being. And I wonder, could you just inform the inquiry as to your own background, please?
I was born in an important ecclesiastical family based in Armagh about the year 1095. As an adolescent, I entered the church at Armagh and studied under Ivar O'Higgins, who was convinced reformer.
And when you use the word reformer there, what are you referring to?
The papal reform movement began in earnest in the 11th century when popes began to try to strengthen their position within the church as a whole. But the reform movement was also about the moral regeneration of society, eradicating abuses like simony, married priests, and so forth.
Very good. Thank you for that explanation. I wonder, could you just carry on then with your description of your own background?
Well, as I say, I studied under Emer. After I was ordained deacon in 1118, I tried to bring church practices in Armagh into line with the church in Rome, but it was an uphill battle. For the righteous God tries the hearts and minds. That's Psalm 7:9. And indeed, he did try my heart most assuredly some years later in Bangor.
I see. And what happened in Bangor?
God, in his infinite wisdom, saw fit to have me appointed abbot of Bangor. I was barely 30 years old, and I soon realized that God had sent me not to men, but to beasts. Never had I known such men, so steeped in barbarism, so wanton in their way of life, Christian in name, yes, yet pagan at heart.
Yes, I think we get the picture, St. Malachy. I wonder, would you answer any questions that the Normans might have for you?
Yes, Judge. We have a number of questions for the saint. Malachy, you are a saint, are you not?
I am.
And so we may take your word as the word of a devout and truthful man. Were the abuses you saw at first hand confined to Bangor?
They certainly were not. The See of Armagh itself was not free from evil practices.
And what do these evil practices consist of, Malachy?
In Armagh, the thoroughly evil custom had arisen of holding see by hereditary succession, passing the position down to their own tribe and family for some 15 generations. There had been 8 married men who were never even ordained. The shame of it all is that by controlling Armagh, they held all of Ireland, for Armagh held a position of primacy in the Irish Church. The result was a breakdown of ecclesiastical discipline. Bishops were changed without order or reason, multiplied at a whim, so that almost every single church in his own bishop, every bishop they had, how could members be so sick, a head be so healthy?
Malachy, this is very significant information you're giving us. Just to clarify, the head here refers to Armagh, yes? And the members, the entirety of the Irish Church, or is it the laity? You're saying that the Irish Church was, in this period, sick.
It was. I saw this with my own eyes.
So it is your honest and expert view that the Church in Ireland was corrupt and that reform was needed to bring it back into line with the true doctrines of Christianity. Thank you. I have no further questions, Judge.
Very good. Now, Mr. Harmon.
Well, thank you, Judge. Malachy, in the 11th century, there were a number of synods organised by Irish kings and ecclesiastics. Isn't that right?
You are very correct in that. There were quite a few synods held. At Cashel in 1101, at Ray Brazil in 1111, at Kells in 1152.
And could you tell the inquiry briefly some of the actions that were taken at those synods?
Well, the Council of Cashel held, as I say, in 1101 and presided over Murtagh O'Brien, King of Ireland, no less, and condemned many vices, including buying a church office, forbidding church superiors for having a woman, forbidding a man marrying his own father's wife or his grandfather's wife or her sister or her daughter or his brother's wife or any other woman to whom he is closely related.
And then 10 years later was the Council of Ray Brazil presided over again by King Murtagh O'Brien.
Yes, and present were some 300 priests and 50 bishops.
And I think there were some important decisions made at Ray Brazil. I think it was decreed, for example, that bishops, new bishops, in an attempt to establish an episcopal hierarchy like the church on the continent, were to be endowed with the resources to establish themselves and to lay taxes on the church and its estates.
Correct.
But more important than that, I think, was the division of Ireland into two major ecclesiastical provinces, Armagh and Cashel, with 13 dioceses in the former and 12 in the latter.
Yes, that was decreed at Raw Brazil.
And I think it was expanded upon at Kells in 1152, isn't that right?
Yes, it was, yes.
And at Kells, I think, two new archdioceses were created, Tuam and Dublin, and the papal legate was present there, isn't that right?
There was indeed a papal legate, a representative of the Pope. That was Cardinal John Paporo, and he endowed the 4 archbishops with a palliae, which is a type of liturgical vestment worn by the Pope and by archbishops.
And apart from all the dressing up, what else happened at Kells?
Well, there were a few.
Well, can you give us some examples of the decisions that were taken?
Well, I believe violence was condemned, rape, robbery, and the like. Oh, dreadful stuff.
I'm sure we can all agree with that, but what about tithes? They were discussed, weren't they?
Yes. It was ordered that tithes be paid.
And there were all the usual prohibitions against simony and the like, and against incestuous marriages.
Yes, there were.
Now, we've been talking about papal legates. I think it's correct that you yourself were appointed a papal legate for a time. And of course, that's a very high-ranking position. Would you say you were a particularly influential churchman?
I'm not sure if I should be the judge of that. But I will say that I kept company with some of the greatest churchmen of our age, not least St. Bernard of Clairvaux.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned St. Bernard, because you were very close yourself and Bernard, weren't you?
Yes, we were. I would consider Bernard a friend. Bernard, for those of you who may not know, was a French abbot, the man most responsible for the expansion of the new Cistercian order, and a great reformer. Oh, he sought to bring monasticism back to first principles: poverty, seclusion, the exercise of manual labor.
And of course, Bernard wrote your biography, which I've had the misfortune to have to read. And for someone who never visited Ireland, he has quite a bit to say about the country, because in that biography he describes Ireland as a place of, and I'm quoting here now, crude barbarism. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's true. What's your point, though?
Well, my point, Malachy, is that such a statement runs contrary to all that you have just told me about the Irish Church in the 12th century.
I fail to see how you could possibly reach such a conclusion.
Well, we seemed, from what you've been telling us, to be getting on quite well with the reform agenda ourselves.
I disagree. Why do you think we needed to be reformed in the first place? Do you doubt that the Irish were not as I have characterized them? Do you doubt the integrity of a saint?
Well, I've certainly got reason to question your motives, Malachy. Yes, absolutely I do. If I can present a different picture to you. Around the year 1139, you set off for Rome, travelling through France, where you first encountered your friend Bernard. And by this time, your ambitions had been, rightly or wrongly, frustrated at Armagh. And you had, by your own admission, faced opposition to reform in Bangor too. And so I put it to you that, embittered, you exaggerated the situation in Ireland when recounting tales to Bernard. And indeed, Bernard tells us that you were received by Pope Innocent II at Rome.
Yes, I was.
And did you discuss the situation in Ireland with the Pope?
I cannot recall.
Well, maybe I can help you, because you most certainly did. Because your friend Bernard tells us that you did. And can I ask you, we actually have it here, I can ask you to read what Bernard wrote. And maybe if I could ask the court to pass it through to,
Very good.
to Malachy.
Without looking at him, of course. Very good.
Thank you. During that period of time, the Supreme Pontiff kept quizzing him and his companions earnestly about their country, the customs of the people, the conditions of the churches, and what great things God had done through him in his country. Yes, I remember that now. I remember that conversation. Lord Pope simply asked me a few questions about Ireland, and I answered them.
I'm glad that we've been able to refresh our memory, Malachy. Was your depiction of Ireland as damning when speaking with the Pope as it was when speaking with Bernard?
I am not going to answer that question.
Another lapse in memory, perhaps. So maybe then to go back to the synods. Is it fair to say that Irish clergy and Irish kings took a prominent role in organising these? And is it fair to say that great strides were made in that respect, that the Irish church is being made to fall in line with practices approved in Rome?
Well, to a point. Certain Irish churchmen, reform-minded individuals, played a prominent role, absolutely. But as I have said, we were not representative of the majority opinion in the Irish church or the Irish society at that time. We were lucky to have had powerful supporters. We've been looking through all this already. May I stand down, Judge? May I stand down, Judge?
Are there any further questions?
I've nothing further, Judge, and perhaps Mr. Prasifka may do.
Just one question before you go. Malachy, you've spoken of the deplorable state of Ireland, of the decay of the church here, and of the desperate need for reform. And you've also said that the reform movement had some powerful supporters. Could I ask you now just to read something else that St. Bernard wrote?
Can no one else read in this court? Huh?
You might just read the piece of paper aloud.
Thank you. Greetings and good wishes to the noble and glorious King of Ireland. Your renown has reached this country, and we rejoice exceedingly in the good reports of you. It is truly a matter of amazement to us that a king who reigns over a barbarous people should pursue the works of mercy with such generosity. We thank your legal majesty praying for you and your kingly salvation, that the Lord our God may give you peace in your days.
And just out of curiosity, to whom is St. Bernard writing these words to?
It is addressed to Diarmuid MacMurrough.
No further questions.
Very good. The witness may stand down. Thank you, St. Malachy.